cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is like 80s sci-fi and film noir. Got together, had a baby, and it's glorious. I love cyberpunk. I love film noir. I love the 80s because I lived the 80s. And I recently did a shoot. Cyberpunk sci-fi in the kiddie pool. And Sierra and I did an episode about the inspiration, about the shoot. We used this weapon, which, by the way, very proud to say, I bought this baby unpainted. I painted it all by myself. It was very fun. And I think photographers, you know what? Have some fun with your shoots. Paint some props. Do some stuff. Just enjoy it. Because it just makes it better. It makes it better when you put a story behind the images. It guides you. And so we recently did that. I put Sierra in the kiddie pool, and I used props like crazy, and we used some gels, and we shot her as if she was a cyborg that had been in suspended animation and was coming out of the depths of the goo to life. So in this particular episode, I'm just going to share the Photoshop that I did for the images. And I want to let you know that this particular Photoshop is actually fairly plugin intensive. I used a lot of plugins. It made it quick. It made it work. So, there's no shame in plugins, but I do think it's important to also know how to work without them. And I used Topaz Clean, and I used the Alien Skin Exposure 6, I think it is. So I'm going to be showing how I used those, and then you'll see the finished result. If you want to see the behind the scenes of the setup, go to Creatives Chat where we talk about that, and we even talk about the costuming and the makeup. So here's the video. Enjoy it. What I used to shoot this was, there's a speed light in the back that's lighting up the plastic. There's an Elinchrom hitting the ceiling that's bouncing down with the blue gel that's hitting her head. But those glasses are LED lit. And it's a very, very low light source. And if I hit her with any form of a strobe, it overrode those glasses. So what I had to do was use an ice light to light the face, and that way it didn't override the glasses. And then I brought the exposure up in Lightroom. So this is the exposure in Lightroom, and yeah, it's pretty dark. But because I shoot in RAW, you can see I was able to very carefully add a crop and bring it up. And that's where I started with this image, was after an adjustment in Lightroom, brought this into Photo. So here we are in Photoshop. All my layers are turned off. And the first thing I did was I wanted to fix that really bright white background where the plastic was just a bit too much. And the way I like to do that is using Content Aware Fill, because Content Aware Fill just usually works really, really well. And so I'm going to go ahead and demo how I did that in Content Aware Fill by turning all of this off and just redoing it one more time. I'm just going to show on one of the areas. So with Content Aware Fill, the first thing I like to do is I just loosely will circle with the lasso tool using L for lasso, and then I will go into Content Aware Fill, and I'm using a feather of about 15 pixels. And so what it does is it tries to determine where it's going to take its information from, and everything green is what it's planning to use. So I will take it away from things that I clearly don't want it to use. And you'll see on the right, it has a preview box that shows you what it thinks, what it's going to look like, so you know what it's doing. And I realized I should take off the water because that plastic shouldn't have had the water texture. It's more of a wall texture. So I'm removing everything that I don't want and watching what happens over on the right. And then when you save it, it creates a new layer, And you can go ahead and you can stamp into that layer and fix it. So this one is not ideal. Sometimes it comes out really good right out of the get-go, and sometimes it's not quite right. But I'm just going to turn back on what I did previously so that I can move forward into the next part of the edit. So the next part of the edit is I created a stamped layer, and I wanted to smooth her skin. Now remember, she's a cyborg. So her skin needs to be kind of perfect because she's not a real person, really. She's a cyborg. So I'm going to use a stamped layer, and you can do that by adding a blank layer and then just do apply image. And now I'm going to take that layer into Topaz Clean, which is one of my favorite tools for really getting the skin clean. And Topaz Clean is like a hammer. You're going to do it on its own layer, and you're going to be adding a layer mask later. So as I bring it in, I'm going to choose the Skin Even option. And you can see this is fairly heavily processed skin. But one of the things I love about Topaz Clean is that I can clean the skin fairly strong and make it smooth, and then I can add pores back in, which gives it a little bit more sense of realism. You know, you can get fake pores. It can do a lot of the work for you very quickly. And once you've got it where you want it, then you just click OK. The problem is, it's a hammer. I now have smooth skin on 100% of my image. So I'm going to add a layer mask, but I'm going to hold Option when I add the layer mask so that it turns off everything. And then you can see when I paint it in, I use white, I paint it in, and it only applies to the skin. So that was my layer mask. So now I'm just going to move forward with what I had done prior. And the next thing I did was add another stamped layer, and I wanted to sharpen just the water. And then added the high pass filter and changed it to overlay. And the high pass filter will capture all of your details, and it kind of turns it gray. And you can see I've masked out a lot of this. I'm only applying the sharpening to the water, the glasses, and the gun. So that way it's not, I don't like to over sharpen, but this is a sci-fi look, so I kind of want to give it some depth and realism. So that's how I did that. So my next layer now is I'm going to go ahead and do a dodge and burn layer, which is a 50% gray set to soft light. And I'm going to show how that works. It's just basically you paint onto the layer with a brush. You can use any color you want, or you can use black and white. And it's going to interact with your image and allow you to lighten, brighten, bring contrast. But by changing it to normal, you can see what that layer looks like without it being on soft light. So when I change it back to soft light, you can see what it does. So I was just darkening the background, lightening some parts of her. I lightened the top of the gun. So my next layer was I was fixing just with the stamp brush some areas in the background that were still just too bright. I don't want to lose the fact that I have a B-movie kind of quality background, but I don't want it to have those bright areas that are going to detract from my image, so I just removed them. And then I added a curves layer, and finally, after the curves layer was just to add contrast. And then after the curves layer, I went and made another stamped image, and I took this into Exposure, Alien Skin Exposure 5, which is the newer one. I think before I might have said Exposure 6, but it's 5, as you can see here. So what I really love here is that this also works in layers, and it remembers what I did last time, which is kind of cool, because if you're doing a lot of images with the same look, you could just keep like bringing them in, and Exposure will just do the same thing to them. So I'm going to turn off the layers here so you can see that the first layer was just to give it a color toning of a cyan blue color toning, which is definitely more cyberpunk and definitely more sci-fi. one of the things that's really big when you're working in sci-fi, cyberpunk style imagery is you really need to color tone it because it's just part of that genre. So I just pick something that I think has a cool look and I go with that. And you can pull back the opacity if you want. Then the next thing I had done was, and you can see on the right, is you can turn on and off effects. And so I was using a light effect, and I was using the light leaks effect to add this red tone because I thought it would be like extra cool, creepy, whatever, to add a little bit of some reds into the water, into the background, kind of frames her. And the way you do that is in their light effects section. And you can see you get all of these different light effects and you can kind of play with them. And it gives you a preview, which I just think is great. And if the preview says at the bottom that it can be moved, then you can move it around and adjust it. You can put it on the other side. You can flip it upside down. You can change the blend mode. And you can see how you can make this work the way you want it. And so I decided that this actually looked better than what I had done before. So I'm going to leave it like this. I'm going to apply it, and it's going to come back into Photoshop as its own image, as its own layer. Remember, you can still work with this. So maybe I decide I want to reduce the opacity, or maybe I decide I want to, like mask some of it off. That's all your decisions with this kind of thing. You don't have to just go into a plugin and take everything from the plugin. You should be using your plugins the way you need them to work with you. You need to use them as a tool. They are not just the end-all be-all filter. So that's the Photoshop, and back to me. Okay, so that was the video. I hope you learned something from it. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments. Happy to answer them. And I will see you again in 2 weeks. I don't know what I'm covering, but if you have any suggestions, let me know. I've got a few ideas, and hope you're doing great. Bye-bye.